Sol slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the strange, soft light that surrounded him. His head throbbed, and the world felt unsteady, like it was spinning just a little too fast. His hands shot out instinctively to steady himself, but his body felt foreign, as if he hadn't used it in days, or perhaps longer. "Where am I?" he thought, trying to push himself up from the bed. He felt something tugging at him, a weight on his limbs that made it hard to move. Panic crept into his chest as he realized he wasn't in the barracks anymore. The sterile white walls of the room were unlike anything he had seen before. There were no windows, only a soft hum of machines that seemed to fill the silence. The air smelled different, clean yet tinged with something metallic. A soft voice broke the stillness. "You shouldn't be awake yet." Sol's eyes snapped to the source of the voice. An alien nurse stood beside him, her features delicate and smooth, her skin a pale shade of blue. She wore a flowing, translucent gown that shimmered slightly under the light. Her eyes, large and round, were filled with concern, but something deeper lurked beneath them, something Sol couldn't quite place. She reached out, her hands moving to gently push him back onto the bed. "You need to rest. You've been through a lot," she said, her tone soothing yet insistent. Sol's mind was a fog, but he was alert enough to understand her words. He was injured. He had to be. But where? What happened to his team? Was everyone okay? "Where am I?" he croaked, his voice rough. He tried to sit up again, but the alien nurse gently pressed a hand against his shoulder, stopping him. Her touch was unexpectedly warm, almost comforting. "You're safe," she replied, not directly answering his question. She spoke with a calmness that made it seem like everything was fine, though her eyes betrayed a deeper unease. "Please, you need to rest. Everything is being taken care of." Sol stared at her, frustration growing. He tried to push the fog out of his brain, but it was like trying to swim through thick mud. He had to know what had happened, what was going on. His team, the battle, the crash, the explosion. It all flooded back in pieces, disjointed and blurry. But the one thing that stood out the most was the feeling of falling through the air, the metal of his ship cracking around him. And then, nothing. "Where's the rest of my squad?" he asked, his voice more insistent this time. "What happened to my ship?" The alien nurse looked away for a moment, her eyes flicking to the door as if checking for someone. When she turned back, her expression had shifted, if only slightly, but it was enough for Sol to catch it. There was sadness there, hidden just beneath her calm exterior. I can't tell you everything yet," she said quietly. "But you were badly injured, and we brought you here to heal." Sol's brow furrowed. This wasn't making sense. He tried to sit up again, his body protesting every movement. His head swam, and the pain in his limbs was intense but not unbearable. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any clues. The machines surrounding him hummed with quiet precision, their blinking lights adding to the feeling of unease. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice still rough. "Where am I?" The nurse hesitated. "I am Sira," she finally said, her voice a little softer. "I am here to help you. You are in a healing facility." Sol narrowed his eyes. "A healing facility? What does that mean?" She sighed, her gaze falling to the ground. "You have suffered injuries that would normally be fatal to your species, but we saved you." She was hesitant again, and Sol's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that he was alive, or the fact that the alien nurse had avoided explaining exactly how. "You saved me," Sol repeated, his voice flat. "But why? Why would you do that?" She glanced at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow, and then quickly looked away. "That's not for you to worry about right now," she said, her tone shifting again to a more professional one. "You need rest." But Sol's mind was racing. Who were these aliens? Why were they so kind yet distant? Why did they go through so much trouble to save him, yet refuse to tell him what happened to his ship, his team? "Why are you crying?" He blurted out, his voice more forceful than he intended. His question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. He had noticed it before, the slight tremor in her voice, the shadow of sorrow in her eyes. But now he couldn't ignore it. The nurse, Sira, froze. Her hand, which had been about to adjust the settings on one of the machines beside his bed, faltered. She didn't speak for a long moment, her lips pressed together as if fighting back something she didn't want him to see. Finally she spoke, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "It's nothing," she said, turning away quickly. "Please, just rest." But Sewell wasn't buying it. He could tell there was more to her reaction, more to her sadness. There was something she wasn't telling him, something he needed to understand, if he was going to make sense of where he was and why he had been saved. "Why are you weeping?" he repeated, his voice gentler now, though still insistent. Sira turned her face away from him, and for a moment Sewell thought she might ignore him. But then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think," she said, her eyes focused on the floor. "I'm sorry, it's nothing." But Sewell wasn't so sure. He watched her for a long time, trying to read her expression, trying to understand the mystery behind her words. There was something deeper happening here, something that had to do with him, with his survival, and with this alien nurse who was trying so hard to hide the truth. Before he could ask her anything more, the door to the room opened, and two more Xanaxian beings stepped inside, their tall forms towering over the bed. They glanced at him with cool, emotionless eyes, but Sewell noticed that Sira's demeanor changed when they arrived. She stood straighter, her sadness momentarily replaced by something else, something more guarded. "We will take over from here," one of the aliens said, his voice cold. Sira nodded silently, her eyes flicking to Sewell for just a second. It was enough. He could tell she wasn't as indifferent as the others. She knew something, and he was going to find out what. As she stepped away, Saul couldn't shake the feeling that his questions were just beginning. Saul lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. The soft hum of the machines around him filled the room, but it didn't bring him comfort. He had so many questions, and no one seemed willing to give him any real answers. The aliens who had saved him, the Xanaxians, as he'd learned they were called, had been kind to him, but there was always something off about their kindness. They seemed so distant. There was no warmth in their actions, just cold efficiency. Sira, the nurse, had been different. She had shown him care. Even though her face always seemed to carry a shadow of sorrow, she had taken the time to speak with him. She hadn't treated him like a patient to be healed and forgotten. But now, after her brief interaction with the two other Xanaxians who had come into the room, Sewell couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. They had dismissed her from his care as if she were nothing more than a servant. It had bothered him more than he was willing to admit. For the first time since waking up, Sewell felt restless. The steady beep of the medical monitors and the quiet hum of the room were no longer comforting. He needed to know what was happening to him. Why was he here? Why were the Xanaxians helping him? His body ached, but not enough to keep him from trying to move. Slowly he sat up, feeling the weight of his limbs, the pain in his chest and legs still present but not unbearable. His mind felt clearer than it had when he first woke up, but it was still clouded by questions. The door to his room slid open, again, and Sewell turned his head to see Sira entering, her face softening when she saw that he was sitting up. She was carrying a small tray with what looked like food, but Sewell wasn't interested in eating. He needed answers. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, her voice still gentle, but her eyes remained guarded. Sewell noticed how she always seemed to hide something when he asked too many questions. "I'm feeling fine," Sewell replied, his voice steady. He looked at the food she brought, but his eyes quickly shifted back to her. "But I need to know more. What happened to my ship? My squad? Why am I here?" Sira placed the tray on the small table beside his bed and then sat down, on the edge of the chair. She looked down for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Sewell could see the hesitation in her eyes, the struggle between telling him the truth and keeping him in the dark. "You were badly injured," she said quietly, still avoiding his gaze. "Your ship was destroyed in battle. There were complications. Your squad, she trailed off, her voice faltering. Sewell could see that this was the part she didn't want to talk about. What complications? Sewell pressed. He needed more than vague answers. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. Sierra looked at him finally, her eyes full of an emotion Sewell couldn't understand. It was a mixture of sadness and something else. Regret? Fear? He couldn't be sure. The battle you were part of. It wasn't just a normal conflict, she said softly. The Xanaxians had no reason to attack your ship, but they did. There's more to it than you know. Sewell felt his heart race. He had known something wasn't right. The Xanaxians weren't allies of humanity. They never had been. But this? This was something else entirely. Why would they attack us, he asked, his voice shaking slightly, more out of anger than fear. Why destroy my ship? Why are you helping me? Sierra's eyes seemed to cloud over as she turned her head, looking away from him. She didn't want to answer. She was hiding something, Sewell was sure of it. I don't have all the answers, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you're not the only human here. There are more. Many more. You're part of something bigger now. Sewell was silent for a long moment, trying to piece together what she had said. More humans. Where were they? What had happened to them? Before he could ask, Sierra quickly changed the subject. You should eat something, she said, standing up and motioning to the tray on the table. You need your strength. Sewell shook his head. I don't want food, I want answers. Her gaze hardened for just a moment before she softened again. Not all answers are for you to know, she replied, her voice tinged with an odd sense of finality. The Xanaxians have their reasons, their plans. Sierra seemed to hesitate again, as if debating whether she should tell him more. Finally, she sat down once more, leaning forward, her voice low. Not all Xanaxians are the same, she whispered. Some of us can't live with what they're doing, but it's too dangerous to talk about. Too many eyes are watching. Sewell stared at her, trying to understand what she meant. There was so much she wasn't saying, so much she was holding back. He could feel it, like an invisible wall between them, and it made him angry. He had every right to know what was going on, but it seemed like the more he pushed, the more she would pull away. I don't care if it's dangerous, Sewell said firmly, his voice rising slightly. I deserve to know what's happening. You can't just save me and then act like everything's normal. You owe me the truth. Sierra looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she might stand up and leave, but instead she sighed deeply. I don't know how much longer I can keep you safe, she said softly, almost to herself, but I'll tell you what I can. The Xanaxians are using humans, experimenting on them, testing something. It's not just about healing or survival, it's about control. They want to know what makes humans different, what makes you special. Sewell's mind reeled at her words. What do you mean, special? She met his gaze then, her eyes filled with an emotion Sewell couldn't place. You're more important than you know, she said quietly, and they'll do anything to control you, to control all of you. Sewell's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what to say. He was part of something much bigger than a simple rescue mission. And now he was tangled in the Xanaxians' plans, whether he liked it or not. Before he could ask any more questions, the door to his room opened, and 2 Xanaxians stepped inside. Sierra stood up quickly, her face going blank again as she faced the newcomers. We are here to monitor the patient, one of them said in a clipped voice, his eyes scanning Saul's prone form. Sierra nodded stiffly. Of course, she replied, her voice distant now, the warmth gone. As the Xanaxians set to work, Saul's mind raced with the new information he had just learned. He was caught in a web of secrets and no one seemed willing to tell him the whole truth. But he knew one thing for sure now. Whatever was happening, he wasn't just a survivor. He was part of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. Saul sat on the edge of the bed, his mind spinning. Sira's words echoed in his ears. The Xynaxians were using humans, experimenting on them, and controlling them. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there were still so many gaps. Why were the Xynaxians doing this? What did they want with humanity? His thoughts were interrupted when Sira entered the room again, her steps soft but purposeful. She was carrying a small device, one that looked like a holographic projector. It clicked softly as she set it down on the table in front of him. Sul didn't know what it was, but the way Sira handled it told him it was important. "Sit back," Sira said, her voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. "I think it's time you saw something." Sul raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask any questions. He sat back against the bed and waited. His heart was still racing from the new information, but he trusted Sira. Despite everything, there was something in her that felt different from the other Xynaxians, something real. Sira pressed a button on the device, and instantly, a holographic screen flickered to life. The image that appeared on the screen was of a ship. His ship. Sul's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. It was the vessel he had been stationed on, the one he had been commanding. But there was something wrong. The ship was burning, flames licking the edges of the hull, debris floating in space around it. Sul could hear the faint hum of the ship's alarms, but they were distant, as though they were coming from another time, another place. "What happened?" Sul whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Sira didn't answer immediately. She simply let the footage play. The image zoomed in on the destruction, showing pieces of the ship falling apart, then shifting to something worse. There were bodies floating in space, soldiers in uniform drifting lifelessly. Sul's heart clenched as he recognized some of them. His squad. His friends. The image shifted again, this time to a group of Xynaxians standing near the wreckage, their dark eyes scanning the debris. They weren't there to help, they were there to watch. Sul could see them taking samples from the wreckage, collecting human remains. He felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. They had done this. They had attacked his ship, destroyed it, and now they were picking through the pieces like it was nothing more than a science experiment. "This can't be real," Sul muttered, his hands balling into fists. Why would they do this?" Sira turned her gaze away from the screen for a moment, her face unreadable. She looked like she was about to say something, but instead she pressed a button, and the image vanished. The room seemed quieter all of a sudden. The weight of what Sul had just seen pressed down on him. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Sira said softly. Her voice was gentle, but Sul could hear the guilt in it. "But you needed to know." "Why did they attack us?" Sul asked, his voice raw. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Why would they destroy a human ship? We weren't a threat." Sira paused, looking like she was choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't about the ship or your crew. It was about you, and what you represent." "What do I represent?" Sul asked, more confused than ever. Sira's eyes met his, and for the first time Sul saw something other than sadness in her gaze. There was a deep seriousness there, a quiet resolve. "You were part of an experiment, Sul. You weren't just a soldier. You were chosen." Sul frowned, not fully understanding. "Chosen for what?" Sira hesitated again, her eyes flicking to the door, as if she were afraid someone might be listening. "The Xynaxians. They've been studying humans for a long time. They want to know what makes you different. Why humans can survive in conditions that should kill other species. Why you're so resilient, so strong. They've been experimenting on humans, trying to understand what makes you special. You were a part of that experiment." Sul's stomach churned. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had been a part of an experiment? He wasn't just a soldier. He was a subject. He had been used by the very people who had attacked his ship, killed his friends, and destroyed everything he had known. "That's why they saved you," Sira continued, her voice low. "They need you for something bigger. They need to understand how you survive, how your body works, how you can resist conditions that would destroy any other species. And they'll do whatever it takes to get that knowledge." Soul stared at her, struggling to process her words. His whole life he had been a soldier, fighting for his people, his planet, doing what was asked of him. But now everything had changed. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was a part of something he couldn't even begin to understand. So what happens now? Soul asked, his voice tight. What do they want from me? Sira looked down, her face troubled. I can't answer that. I don't know what their plans are. But I know they won't stop until they get what they want. There was a long silence between them, the weight of the truth settling in like a heavy fog. Soul could feel his chest tightening, the anger and confusion swirling inside him. He wasn't just a survivor of a crash anymore. He was part of something dark, something dangerous, and he didn't know how to get out of it. I won't let them use me, Soul said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I won't be a part of whatever they're planning. Sira met his gaze, her expression unreadable. It's not that simple. You may not have a choice. Before Saul could respond, the door opened again and 2 Zynaxian soldiers stepped into the room. Sira quickly stood up, her expression shifting back to one of professionalism. She had already said more than she should have. Saul knew it. We need to take him for further testing, one of the soldiers said, his voice flat and unemotional. Sira nodded, but Saul could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't want this to happen. But there was nothing she could do. As the soldiers moved toward him, Saul stood up, his mind made up. He wouldn't go quietly. He would find a way to fight back, no matter the cost. He wasn't going to be their experiment. Saul stood still, his mind racing as the 2 Zynaxian soldiers approached. His heart was pounding in his chest, his fists clenching at his sides. He knew he couldn't let them take him without a fight. But even as the soldiers moved toward him, something inside him told him he didn't have much of a choice. They were bigger, stronger, and their weapons were far more advanced than anything he had. Still, his thoughts were sharp. He had to find a way out of this. He wasn't going to be used as some lab rat. Just as one of the soldiers reached for him, Sira stepped in between them, her expression calm, but determined. Stop, she said, her voice firm, though there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. The soldier stopped, glancing at her. I will escort him myself. The soldiers exchanged a brief look and then nodded. Very well, one of them said before turning to leave. The other soldier followed, casting one last glance at Saul. As the door closed behind them, Saul's eyes locked onto Sira. What are you doing? He asked, his voice low but urgent. You can't protect me from them forever. Sira didn't immediately respond. Instead, she moved closer to him, her eyes scanning the hallway outside the door, making sure no one else was around. When she was satisfied that they were alone, she turned back to Saul. You're right, she said softly, but I'm trying to buy us some time. I'm not going to let them take you without a fight. There's something bigger going on here. I can't tell you everything yet, but I need you to trust me. Saul narrowed his eyes, uncertainty flashing in his mind. She had already told him a lot, but it wasn't enough. There were too many questions still left unanswered. I'm listening, he said, his voice steady. Sira took a deep breath and stepped back, her hands folding in front of her as if preparing to reveal a secret she had been holding for a long time. I'm not like the others, she said quietly. I didn't always agree with what the Zynaxians were doing. I was part of their system, a medical officer on their team, but I couldn't ignore the way they treated humans. I couldn't just stand by while they took people like you, experimented on them, and discarded them like tools. Saul felt a flicker of hope inside him. It was the first time since he woke up in this strange place that he'd heard anyone speak about the Zynaxians in a way that didn't sound like they were on the same side. But why help me? Saul asked, his confusion growing. Why risk everything? You said they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted from me. Sira looked down for a moment, her face softening. I helped you because I couldn't live with what they were doing anymore. There are others like me, Zynaxians who don't agree with the way things are being done. We've been planning something, a way to stop them. Saul's eyes widened. A rebellion? Sira nodded. Yes, but it's more complicated than just fighting. We have to get inside their inner circle. We need to expose the truth, and we need your help to do it. Saul stepped back, the weight of her words sinking in. He hadn't come here expecting to be part of a rebellion, but the thought of taking down the Xanaxians filled him with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just going to sit back and let them control him. He had his own mission now. Why me? Sewell asked, his voice firm. Why do you need me? Sira's eyes met his, her expression serious. You're not just any soldier, Saul. You were chosen because you're different. The Xanaxians believe that humans have something inside them, something that makes them stronger than any other species. They want to unlock that power, and they've been studying you to figure out how to control it. Sewell clenched his fists. They want to control us? They're using us as experiments. That's exactly what they've been doing, Sira replied. But it's not just about you. It's about all of humanity. If the Xanaxians get their hands on what they want, it won't just be your ship they destroy. They'll come for every human colony, every human soldier, every person who's ever fought for their freedom. We have to stop them before they do any more damage. Sewell felt a surge of anger rise in him, but it was mixed with something else. Determination. This wasn't just about saving himself anymore. This was about saving everyone. He wasn't going to let the Xanaxians get away with this. He wasn't going to let them treat humans like experiments. So what do we do now? Sewell asked, his voice steady. How do we fight back? Sira gave him a small, relieved smile. That's the hard part. We need to get to the heart of their operations. There's a facility where they're conducting the most dangerous experiments. We have to infiltrate it, get the evidence, and expose everything. Only then can we start rallying the others, start fighting back. Sewell nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a simple rescue mission. They were up against an enemy that was bigger, stronger, and smarter than anything humanity had faced before. But that didn't matter to him anymore. He wasn't going to back down. Where do we start? Sewell asked. Sira's face became serious again. We need to get you out of here first. We can't do anything if they keep you locked away. Just as she finished speaking, the door to the room opened again, and another Xanaxian entered. This one was different, taller, with darker skin and markings across his arms. He didn't look like the others. He wasn't as cold or detached. Sira, he said, his voice quiet but firm. It's time. We have to move now. They're on to you. Sira's eyes widened and she turned to Sewell, her face filled with urgency. It's happening faster than I thought. You have to come with me, now. Sewell's heart raced. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stand by and do nothing. He wasn't going to let the Xanaxians win. Sewell's heart raced as Sira and the strange Xanaxian walked briskly through the dimly lit hallways. The facility was vast, its walls made of smooth metallic surfaces that seemed to hum with an unseen energy. The air felt thick with tension, but Sewell could feel a new sense of purpose filling him. For the first time since waking up, he wasn't just trying to survive. He had a plan. They had a plan. As they moved deeper into the facility, Sira glanced back at Sewell, her face a mask of determination. We don't have much time, she said quietly. They know I've been helping you and they won't hesitate to stop us if they catch on. Sewell nodded, his jaw tightening. Then let's not waste any more time. Tell me what we need to do. Sira led him down another corridor, this one darker and less populated. The air seemed colder here, and the walls had a more industrial feel. Sewell could tell they were getting closer to something important. The Xanaxians had hidden their secrets well, but Sira was determined to expose them, no matter the cost. We need to reach the central control room, Sira explained in a low voice. It's where they monitor all of the experiments. There we can access the data, get the proof we need to expose them. Sewell's stomach churned at the thought. The Xanaxians had been experimenting on humans for who knew how long. He couldn't let them continue. He had to stop them. "Do you know what we'll find there?" Saul asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Sira hesitated for a moment. "I don't know the full extent of what they're doing, but I know that whatever is going on, it's not just about testing your species. It's about control. They want to harness your strength, your resilience for themselves. And if we don't stop them, they'll use it to conquer everything." The gravity of her words hit Sewell hard. He had always known that the Xanaxians weren't exactly friendly, but hearing this confirmed his worst fears. They weren't just invaders. They were manipulators, exploiting every species they could control to expand their empire. They had done it to the humans, and now they were planning to use them to conquer the galaxy. "I won't let them do that," Sewell said firmly, his fists clenched. Sira gave him a small, understanding smile. "That's why we're doing this. Together." They reached a large, heavily guarded door at the end of the hallway. 2 Xanaxian guards stood outside, their eyes cold and unblinking as they surveyed the corridor. Soul's heart skipped a beat. He knew they couldn't just walk in. They needed to get past them. Sira turned to Soul and whispered, "We have to move quickly. Follow my lead." She stepped forward and approached the guards with a calm, confident stride. Soul followed, his eyes fixed on her. He couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. Despite the risks, despite everything that had happened, she was focused. She knew what had to be done, and she wasn't backing down. When they reached the guards, Sira spoke in a low, authoritative voice. "I need to speak with the commander. Immediately." The guards exchanged a brief look, their expressions unreadable. After a moment, one of them stepped aside, his body language stiff but compliant. "You may enter," he said with a forced tone. Soul felt a flash of relief, but he didn't let his guard down. They were close, but this wasn't over. Not yet. The door slid open, revealing a large, dimly lit room filled with consoles and screens. The central control room was buzzing with activity as Xanaxians moved about, monitoring various systems. At the far end of the room was a large holographic display showing a map of the galaxy, with bright points marking various locations of interest. Sira led Saul to one of the terminals, her eyes scanning the room carefully. She quickly began typing commands into the console, her fingers moving with practiced speed. Saul kept watch, his senses heightened. He could feel the tension building as the minutes passed. They couldn't afford to get caught now. They were so close. As Sira worked, she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible. "We need access to the core data files. They contain everything about the experiments, the plans, the truth about what the Xanaxians have been doing." Soul glanced around the room, keeping an eye out for any sign of trouble. The guards were still positioned outside, but inside it was only a matter of time before someone noticed what they were doing. "What if someone comes in?" Sewell asked, his voice low. "What do we do then?" Sira paused for a brief moment, her fingers hovering over the keys. "If anyone comes in, we'll have to deal with it fast, but don't worry, I've done this before." Sewell trusted her, but the thought of facing more Xanaxians made his heart race. They couldn't afford to fail now. If they didn't expose the truth, everything would be for nothing. The Xanaxians would keep their control and humanity would remain at their mercy. Suddenly a loud beep from the console broke the silence. The screen flashed a warning and Sewell felt his heart drop. "They're onto us," Sira said, her voice sharp. "We have a few minutes, maybe less. We need to get this data, now." She quickly typed in a few more commands, and the files began to transfer to a secure drive. Soul kept watch, his eyes darting between the screens and the door. His body was tense, every muscle ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. As the last of the data downloaded, Sira closed the terminal, her face grim. "We have what we came for, let's go." But just as they turned to leave, the door slid open, and 2 Xanaxian soldiers stepped inside, their eyes narrowing as they saw Sira and Saul standing by the console. The tension in the room snapped instantly. "Stop!" one of the soldiers commanded, drawing his weapon. Saul's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. They weren't going down without a fight. Sierra turned to him, her expression hardening. Get ready. With that, the fight for their lives began. The moment the door slammed open, Sewell's heart jumped. The two Xanaxian soldiers entered, their eyes immediately locking onto him and Sierra. The tension in the room was thick, like a storm ready to break. Saul's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. He had no idea how many soldiers were outside, but he knew they didn't have much time. Sierra's hand shot out, gripping Saul's arm. We need to move, she said urgently, her voice low. Now. The soldiers stepped forward, their weapons raised, their bodies tense. Saul knew they didn't want to kill him if they didn't have to. He wasn't just another soldier to them. He was an asset, a tool in their experiments. But that didn't mean they wouldn't do whatever it took to keep him under control. One of the soldiers spoke in a sharp, commanding tone. Step away from the terminal. Now. Saul's pulse raced. He could see the flicker of recognition in their eyes. They knew what Sierra was doing. They knew they were trying to escape with the data. There was no turning back now. They had to fight. Do you think you can stop us? Saul asked, his voice steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. The Xanaxians didn't respond immediately. Instead, they moved closer, their weapons aimed at him and Sierra. Saul's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. He couldn't fight them head-on, not without getting captured or worse. His options were limited and the clock was ticking. Suddenly, Sierra moved, her movement swift and fluid. She grabbed the secure drive that had the data they needed and slipped it into her pocket. She turned to Sewell, her eyes filled with determination. Run, she said, her voice hard but filled with urgency. Sewell didn't need to be told twice. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the door, his legs carrying him faster than he thought possible. The Xanaxians shouted behind him, but he didn't look back. His feet pounded against the metal floor, his breath coming fast as he pushed forward, Sierra at his side. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the hallway, but Sewell didn't dare slow down. He could feel the Xanaxians closing in. They weren't far behind. He had no plan beyond running, just the hope that they could get out of the facility before it was too late. As they turned a corner, Sierra held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. They ducked into a small darkened alcove, their breaths ragged as they tried to quiet their movements. Sewell could hear the soldiers' voices now, their footsteps growing louder as they searched for them. They're close, Sierra whispered, her voice tense. We need a distraction. Sewell's mind raced. A distraction? What could they use? They had nothing but the hallway ahead, the silent walls closing in on them. And then it hit him. He remembered the systems in the central control room, systems that monitored everything, systems that could be used to their advantage. I have an idea, Sewell said quietly, his voice filled with urgency. We can trigger the alarms, draw them away. Sierra nodded, her eyes locking onto his. It'll buy us a few minutes, but it's risky. We don't have a choice, Sewell said firmly. We trigger the alarms, and while they're distracted, we move. Sierra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let's go. They moved quickly, carefully making their way back toward the control room. They couldn't afford to be caught now. Every step was calculated, every noise kept to a minimum. As they approached the room, Sewell's mind went over the plan once more. They reached the terminal and Sierra immediately began typing commands, her fingers moving faster than Sewell could follow. He stood behind her, his eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of approaching guards. He could feel the tension building, each second feeling like an eternity. With a final press of a button, the alarm blared, a loud, shrill sound that pierced the air. The lights above them flickered as the emergency systems activated, and the building began to shake slightly as if it were reacting to the chaos. That's it, Sierra said, her voice filled with relief. Let's move. They sprinted down the hallway again, the loud alarm now covering the sound of their footsteps. It was a gamble, but it was the only shot they had. The Xanaxians would be distracted, confused by the sudden change in the facility's systems. They had to use that time to escape. As they ran, Sewell could hear the voices of the soldiers shouting behind them. Stop them! Stop them now! But it was too late. The alarm was doing its job. The soldiers had been forced to split up, trying to restore order to the chaos they had just caused. Sul and Sira didn't slow down. They pushed forward, their legs burning with the effort, their minds focused on one thing: escape. They reached a large door, one that led to the outer section of the facility. The exit was close now. Sul could see the doors ahead glowing with the faint light of freedom. But just as they reached the door, it slammed shut, locking them in. Sira cursed under her breath, slamming her fist against the door. "We're not going to make it," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Don't give up yet," Sul said, his eyes scanning the area. There had to be another way. And then he saw it, an emergency panel near the door. It was their only chance. He rushed to the panel, ripping it open. Inside were wires, buttons, and a small lever that controlled the door's locking mechanism. He didn't hesitate. He yanked the lever and the door began to slide open with a loud groan. "Come on," he yelled, his heart racing. Sira didn't waste a second. She followed him through the opening, and they burst into the fresh air outside, the facility. Sul's lungs filled with the cool, crisp air, and for the first time since he woke up, he felt alive. They had made it out. The Zynaxians were still in the facility, their chaos only just beginning to unfold, but they were free, for now. Sira turned to him, a slight smile on her face. "We did it," Sul nodded, his chest still heaving with exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. They had the data, they had the truth, and now it was up to them to finish what they started. The fight was far from over. "We've only just begun," Sul said, his voice filled with determination.